Hello and welcome to Agile's webcast, Better, Faster, Cheaper, Happier, Measurements for Agile Software Development Organizations. In today's webcast, Ian Spence of IJI will share with attendees why most organizational measures fail, what you should measure, and how to set the path to measurement success. Before we begin, I have just a few general administration things to mention. One is everyone will be on mute for the duration of the webcast. If you have questions during the webcast, though, please feel free to submit them with the question feature function in GoToMeeting, and we will allow time at the end of the webcast for Ian to answer those questions. And you can do that at any time during the webcast. The webcast itself will be approximately 40 minutes in length, and then we'll allow the remaining time for Q&A. So before Ian begins, I'd like to introduce Ian. Ian specializes in the Agile application of the unified process. He is a certified RUP practitioner, Scrum Master, and an experienced coach, having worked with hundreds of projects to introduce iterative and Agile techniques. He has over 20 years' experience in the software industry, covering the complete development life cycle, including requirements capture, architecture, analysis, design, implementation, and project management. His specialty subjects are iterative project management, agile team working, and requirements management with use cases. Ian is co-author of the Addison Wesley books, Use Case Modeling, and Managing Iterative Software Development Projects. And a quick slide on IJI for those on the call not familiar with Ivar Jacobson International. IJI is a global services company. We help software organizations transform and improve the way in which they develop software solutions, as well as guide them in meeting the expectations of the business. The ultimate goal for every development organization is to produce good software quickly and at low cost. At IJI, our focus and our expertise is to resolve issues in the areas of bridging the gap between business and IT, defining requirements, and ensuring that the solution meets the needs of the business, meeting project budget and deadlines, and getting teams to work effectively. I'll now pass the presentation over to Ian. And Ian, I'll give you control of the mouse. And you should now have control of the mouse. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Leanne. And welcome to this IGI webinar, everybody else. Today, I'd like to talk about an approach to organizational measurement, one that will allow us to build on the benefits that Agile has brought to the industry, and for those of us who are embarking on Agile transformations, provide a mechanism to help us form our targets and demonstrate objectively that the new Agile ways of working are better than the old ways of working, and provide us with a foundation for continuous improvement. Most Agile literature talks a lot about project measurements, about the projects being empirical, but very little's been said about how we can measure the performance overall, how we can create a situation we can actually show that the Agile projects are better, faster, cheaper than the traditional projects or any other things that are going on in the organization. So to do this, I'd like to start by just having a quick look at some of the issues around organizational measurement and what it is that agility promises to organizations and how that can help us to frame our measurement strategy. We'll then take a brief look at the Agile approach to measurement that we've evolved at IJI, talk about some of the things you should measure, and show how we can set targets and reap rewards from the improvements that we put in place. So, what's wrong with current measurement practices? If I can get the slide to move on. So, the We have lots of current measurement practices. For you working in IT departments and IT organisations, there's probably lots of data already being collected, but often it's not really being used. And often we're not collecting the right sort of information. What we tend to do as technologists is collect very detailed information and present it in a very technical way. We talk about things like process maturity levels, productivity indexes. I've even seen some stuff about agile maturity models so that we can show how agile we are. And the problem with this kind of approach is it doesn't provide anything that the business and the customers can relate to. The business doesn't really care how agile they are. They want to see the results. They want to be able to see targets, see improvements, and understand the benefits and the results being generated by IT. Then they can put into context, what value agility, what value our process improvement has brought to the organization. And you see this a lot. I mean, we get involved as a company in a lot of agile transformations, large-scale agile transformations. And one of the key things to success is to be able to demonstrate that things are really getting better. And not just better in the short term during that first flush of enthusiasm when the A players are adopting the new techniques, but the long term as we continue on our journey of continuous improvement and see improvements every quarter, every 6 months, every year. Large-scale agile transformations are not things that happen in a few weeks. You start to put things in place and then you continue to improve, inspect and adapt as you go forward. So we need a way to make visible where we are and where we're going. And we need to do it in a way that everybody and what we see is that most measurement programs don't really achieve those kind of goals. A lot of them add very little value. People look at the wrong things. They have lots of numbers, lots of quantitative measures, but very few qualitative measures. They tend to measure secondary rather than primary measures. So rather than measuring the quality and communicating what quality levels, they'll tell you the defect detection rate or something like that. And a lot of focus on short-term rather than long-term measures. Even as we continue to make project and release cycles more frequent, major IT investments last for many years. We need to see the changes. We need to be able to view the seasonal fluctuations. And as I said on the previous slide, a lot of the data is presented in the wrong way. There's often confusing, contradictory data. Talk a lot about the purpose is often unclear. We get involved in process rollout, so we'll tell people how many projects are working agile, how many are doing test-driven development. But this isn't stuff that's going to communicate to the business. Our goal is not to build our CVs by using the sexiest practices. The goal is to improve things, to make them, as the title of the talk goes, better, faster, cheaper, with happier customers and happier employees. There's a couple of graphs that you can see, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen charts like this. When you look at things like the kind of measures you get out of your defect tracking, you'll often get a graph like this where there's lots of activity, lots of lines going up and down, they're crossing over each other. We can have priority 1 to 5 and change across, all these things coming in. But if you can look at that graph, which is a real graph of some defect trends, some of the information has been removed to protect the guilty, but if you can tell me if their quality of this particular thing is improving or not from that graph, then you're probably a better man than I am. And what we see is lots of these measures, lots of graphs where bar charts with 3 different, priority 1 and priority 2, priority 3, and color bands, and some are growing and some are shrinking. It's very difficult to see what the end goal is, very difficult to set any real targets for those sort of things. And those kind of measures are not clear, they're not concise, they're not easy to interpret. So we've done a lot of work to find a set of measures where things are very intuitive, where everyone can understand them without having to have a training course or any real deep knowledge of IT or anything else, but simple ones where the direction of improvement is clear and things are simple and concise. And this is very important to how we go about measures. The best measures are simple and easy to understand. They're not complex derived measures. They're not indexes that take into account project length, cost overruns and things like that. They're not measures that are based on theories that aren't based on anything about how, oh, it's much better to do this or to do that, therefore if we measure what we're doing we must be getting better. And let's measure the things that really matter. Let's look at the effects like we see on the slide, not the causes. And also this kind of organisational measurement, we have to measure things across months and years. We need to be aware of seasonal fluctuations, particularly as we're moving from a waterfall world to a more iterative world. You'll find that a lot of waterfall projects, they all start at the beginning of the year, and then they have a big, they all end towards the end of the financial year. So there can be no activity to measure in some of the months, which can cause problems as you look for trends and things. It's very important that organisational measures are process independent. No matter which practices we believe in, there will always be new ways of working coming along, and we need to be able to apply them and measure the results. And we've got to think about how people feel, because otherwise we can be hitting all our deadlines with the right quality levels and fulfilling all the requirements, but we can still have unhappy customers, unhappy users. I remember once reading an article where someone claimed that their software was developed so well that they didn't need to have a change request system because no user had ever raised a change request, so their software was perfect. I suspect the end result actually was that no one had raised a change request because no one was using their software. When people love things, they give you lots of feedback, but you need to get that qualitative. You need to ask them whether they like the software, whether they're using it, whether they feel they're getting value for money. So gather those qualitative as well as the quantitative data. And make sure that we have, like say, practical measures that focus on the real goals of the business. That's the business as a whole and the business of the IT organisation or the IT department. So we need to take on board a lot of the lessons from the Agile community, where they've made things very simple. The way that user stories and relative estimating, test-driven development, these can all be explained in ways that everyone can understand. They don't go off into the the techno babble that we've associated with a lot of IT in the past. And they are open, self-organizing and adapted to change. So when we were looking for ways to think about measuring Agile transformations and Agile organizations, we thought we'd look at what's at the heart of agility. Why were businesses getting involved in agility? What is the promise of Agile methods? And what we find when you talk to business people, what is appealing for agility to them is this idea that when you do Agile software development, you will get better products. You will get them faster and you will get them cheaper. This is what Agile means to the business. Things like continuous integration are only useful if they help us get better software, faster time to market, cheaper products. And there's actually quite a lot of evidence out there that this promise holds true. And you can see on the slide a nice summary from DRECO of various return on investments surveys, including Scott Ambler's Ambisoft stuff, but some stuff from Microsoft, and the version 1 had survey had a very large number of responses, and they all show great promises for productivity, for quality, for cost. But they generally have been talking to the enthusiasts on the first project, and it will all be very much based on how much more productive do you feel you were? How much better do you think your quality was? How much do you think your cost reductions would be? They won't have been comparing like with like, and they won't have been considering the state of the other projects and things going on. But the promise is certainly there, and this is what people want to see as they make investments in these kind of transformations. The other result of Agile working is this idea of happier. And by happier, we're talking about happier customers. That's happier users, happier sponsors, happier purchasers. And surveys show 25 to 85% increases in customer satisfaction and, importantly, as well as in employee satisfaction and job satisfaction. And this is very important. This is a qualitative measure that we can look at. And this is very important in one of the key areas that IGI sees every day is this distrust that's built up between business and IT, what Gartner here called the Hobbesian trap, where it's actually an escalating spiral of distrust. If we can demonstrate that we're doing better, faster, cheaper, and make sure that we take on board our customers and our users and stakeholder concerns and make them happier with happy employees, we can start to bridge that gap. If we can show the value and the results that IT is generating in a way the business can understand, then again we will start to close that gap and bring the business and IT together. And when we're looking at all this, it seems obvious really that we should start to frame our measurement inside the same kind of framework. Let's measure the desired results. If agility and our agile transformation is going to make us better, let's look at the things it's going to make better and let's set some targets. If it's going to make us faster, let's look at the things it's going to make faster, and again, let's set some targets and track against them. If it's going to make us cheaper and happier, let's focus on those things. And what's great about using this better, faster, cheaper, happier as our measurement framework is the framework itself becomes very aspirational. You can see, why are we measuring? We're measuring because we want to demonstrate against these different areas. This year we are going to become better by, and this leads you to the first set of questions and the first set of measures that you need to put in place. And we'll look at how the measurement evolves across time and how you change your things you measure as you change your goals. But the framework sits there as a set of aspirations for us to continually improve and make sure that when we do improve, that we don't diminish our performance in the other areas. So that's a bit of the background. We had this problem of the organizational measurement, getting any traction. I've seen many organizations where every year they introduce some key performance indicators, and by the end of the year they've abandoned them. I've seen many organizations with large dashboards with those kind of graphs I talked about earlier that nobody understands and nobody really looks at, but a lot of money is spent on them. So we need to change this whole approach. So how can we go about changing our approach to measurement at an organizational level to be more agile, to value people, of processes, collaboration over contracts? All those good things from the Agile Manifesto should be visible within our measurement program as well. So what we like to say is the best thing to do is start with this framework. Start with the goals, better, faster, cheaper, happier, and be smart with your measures. Look at what's important. In terms of getting better, are you becoming more predictable and delivering a higher level of quality? Look at the problem areas you've got, and you can phrase questions that the business and that everyone can understand within the framework of better, faster, cheaper, and happier. I mean, a lot of organizations, do they have happy customers? Do you have happy teams? Some people are totally ignorant of anything like that, so focused they are on the financials or on secondary measures, they forget to think about the most important goals. And alongside that, we need to present it very intuitively. Make sure all the graphs have obvious trends. Where we have an improvement objective, there must be a gap between where we are and where we want to be, which allows us to track that trend. So let's look at it. Let's look at how we're doing every month. Let's look at how we're doing for the year to date, quarterly, and have simple graphs so we can see the obvious trends. Get the balance between the four areas so we can make sure we're not improving one area at the expense of another. Where we actually start to hit our targets, then we should stop using the graphs. Once they bottom out and become a straight line, they become a little boring. So we can start to use meters We prefer to use meters and dials as opposed to traffic lights because you can see them month on month as they start to head towards the danger area. And make sure that we focus on results, on the primary measures, and use as much of the language of the business as possible. Let the business frame the questions, and then we can introduce the measures to support them. So this is a way to allow us to communicate the effectiveness of IT in a way that everybody can understand, and in a way that's independent of the processes used by the projects and organisational units being measured. So how do we present the measures? Well, one of the things you need to be aware of before you embark on any measurement program is there are lots and lots of measures, and we'll take a little look at some of the measures in our measurement catalogue, but they have to be feasible and they have to be cost effective. So you need to know if you've got historical data available. One of the first things we always do when we start on a measurement program is go and look at what's being collected. Most organisations have got a lot of information, financial, schedule. We can mine that to start to create a baseline so that we can start to move towards our first goals. And whilst we're doing that, we can start to put in place, the baseline for what we believe will be the next set of improvements for the organisation. We need to make sure that we know how much it's going to cost and maintain. We're also going to need to tune our dashboard, tune our measurement program, so that we reflect the changing goals. As with our Agile projects, we have to have a measurement program respond to change. We may find that because of the commercial circumstances, we actually need to focus much more on getting cheaper than we are on happier and faster or something. So do that and be prepared to swap between graphs and meters as the goals change, and keep the number of measures you're focused on, typically about half a dozen key goals for any sort of 6 to 12 month period. And make sure that we present them in a practical way that people can understand intuitively. Once we've done that, we can start displaying our dashboard more broadly, and we can set very good, as we'll see, targets and incentives for people. And it all starts on this breakdown of the questions. So what we've evolved is what we believe is an intuitive framework. So in each area, there's a primary question that should make sense to everyone involved. And then, we developed lots of common questions that organisations could have problems with. Is the IT department meeting their commitments, yes or no? Are they achieving appropriate quality levels? And these questions guide us towards the right measures to support our goals. And which frame all these things in ways, you'll notice all the questions are things that everyone involved, from customers, business sponsors, heads of profession, and developers should all understand and be able to get an idea of where the areas of weakness are and the things that we need to measure. So within this framework, using this idea of make sure we understand what our goals are so we can pick the right measure and answer the questions that the business and the stakeholders really have. So what kind of things should we be measuring? Are there any common measures that everybody uses? We haven't got time to go through all of the measures that we have available, but it's a good idea to take a look at a few of them and give you some ideas of the kind of things you could kickstart your measurement program. So the next slide is actually quite a complicated dashboard. Now this is more measures than you would typically be tracking, certainly at the beginning. You'd probably focus on 6 to 8 to start with. But I wanted to give you an idea of the kind of measures and target setting and the kind of meters that we can put in place on a dashboard. We're going to take a look at a couple of the better ones in detail over the next few slides. But before that, a few things here. You'll see we've got measures in better. We've got things like milestone achievement, escape defect. But there's one which is volume achievement, which is a very interesting measure. Agile projects will do a release plan, and as part of that release plan they will estimate the number of story points they're going to be able to deliver. And during the project, which stories are involved will change, but we'll be tracking velocity based on our capacity to do a certain number of story points. Now you can measure that at the end of the project. You can say, well, compared to your initial estimate of story points, how many did you do? And you can get a percentage, and that percentage can be aggregated across all the projects. Even with waterfall projects, you can, again, take their list of requirements, the commitment they made, and compare it to the end. And what you'll find is with most agile and iterative projects is, although there is this myth that, you know, iterative and agile projects are always de-scoping and always changing, what you'll find is that the vast majority actually deliver more story points or more use case points or function points than they originally committed to. They're just not the ones that were predicted at the beginning. And waterfall projects traditionally fall short with de-scoping at the end. And that's the kind of measure we can use that's process independent. We have some faster measures for things like decision making, time to production, cycle times, but also we can measure the timeliness of the delivery. Did the organization, did the business feel they got things when they needed them? With dials we can measure things like the milestone slippage at various points, such as when the objectives are set and then when we get to initial operational capability. We have typical cheaper ones like cost per use case point. Some people use cost per function point. You can do some interesting things with story points. That kind of measure can be quite expensive because you need an independent assessment of the actual point countage. But other good things are like average project cost, budget achievement, value for money. And then in the happier area we have different satisfaction. We have customer and employee satisfaction. But there's another one in there which is business satisfaction. How is the IT organization seen by the sponsors and the CXO type people in the organization? And we often recommend that organizations do a quarterly survey of how those people feel about IT, because they have a different perspective from the people actually, the customers actually involved in the projects on the day-to-day basis. Another interesting one in here is the requirements interpretation and requirements focus that you see towards the bottom right of the slide. Requirements focus is about are the developers doing the most important requirements? Now each agile project will be taking the things off the top of their backlog, but some projects will do well and they'll get through all the essentials into all the musts, into the shoulds, and maybe even be doing the bells and whistles and the coulds. Other projects which could benefit from that investment and those resources will be still stuck not having done the first essential. So by looking at the requirements focus across the organization, we can make sure that as a whole we're actually doing the most important things to the business as a whole and not just the most important things for our product owner or our section of the business. The other one, requirements interpretation, is about how much things change after the developers have said they've done. I know in our Agile world we like to embrace change, we like to show the developers, show the customers what we've built, but if they turn around and say that story is completely wrong and those tests are all the wrong tests, that's going to cost us a lot of money. So we can track how well we actually manage to interpret and build those requirements and set targets for those things. And so lots of these things all aimed to help us answer specific questions and focus on specific problems. So, why are there so many measures on that dashboard? Well, one thing you have to be very careful with any measurement program is watch out for gaming. Tom DeMarco did some experiments back in the 1980s where he actually had the luxury of running the same project with 4 different teams. He gave one team the objective of being better, one being faster, one being cheaper. I'm sort of paraphrasing here. And one to have the happiest users. And where each team with that key objective did better in that objective than the other teams, but worse against the others. And so it's very easy for measures just to move the problems around. Measures have to be balanced. We don't want to become cheaper just by delivering poor quality. We don't want to hit our milestones just by padding all our estimates and all our schedules. So what tends to happen is we start with 6 to 8 measures, so we don't want to set too many targets, but aim at our biggest problems. I had some interesting conversations with a customer when we were talking about, is it best to hit our milestones or to reduce the schedule overruns? And the conclusion we came to was that to the business, less late is still late. A business is interested in things being predictable and being able to make good investments with their money, being able to rely on people to meet their commitments and do what they said they were going to do. Once you've got that predictability, then you can start to speed up, and your transition to more agile methods becomes a lot easier when you have rebuilt trust with the business by making your commitments and hitting your milestones. You'll also find once trends emerge, they get less interesting, but when you see a trend, people will say, okay, that's interesting, but what's going on here? So we see that we're getting faster, but has the cost gone up and down? So you need to have balance. And what you find with that kind of dashboard is it promotes conversations about cause and effect and the interrelationship between the different areas and measures. And you've got to remember, our goal is to improve and not just move the problems around. We don't want all our goldfish jumping from one place to another just to, pander to the latest measurement trend and the latest rewards program. So that balance is very, very important. So one of the most popular measures that we see on people's road to agility is better predictability. Milestone achievement, probably a slightly old-fashioned name, but it's about meeting your commitments. So what percentage of the projects actually hit their release date? That's the most important milestone. And that's set up when we do our release planning. So what we can do here is we can start and we can look at month by month, and you can see that in August there were 0 projects released on time. Now that doesn't mean that there wasn't any work going on. It probably means there were no projects finished in that month. It's August, it's holidays. I don't know what happens where you are, but certainly in many parts of Northern Europe, the country's shut down for a whole month. Everyone goes on holiday. So, no new releases will be released. It's much more interesting to look at the moving average because that eliminates those kind of seasonal fluctuations. And once you've got the numbers, you can calculate 3, 6 and 12-month moving averages, and you can look at your trend and you can measure year to date as well. So you can see in this case, this organisation are only hitting, between sort of 45 and 55% of their release dates. And that's probably not good enough. You would expect a world-class software development organisation to be hitting over 90%. Because when you're when half your projects are late, you lose all the confidence of the business and all the trust starts to diminish. So we can see the current situation. So the next step would be to set some targets and to continue our measurement. So you can see here we've set a target of 80%, and in the last few months of measurement, well, 3 out of the last 4, we managed to achieve that. But our moving average year to date is still a little bit low. So for the year, if we're paying our bonus at this point, we haven't achieved the target, but we're only in June, so we've probably got a few months left to go. So as we carry on, we continue and start to have months where we're hitting all our release dates. This is what we would expect, particularly as we start to get more agile projects and we start to remove those late waterfall projects by completing them. And now we're getting everything focused at the at the top level of the graph, and the trend will start to become much more of a straight line. And this is the time to move from tracking trends to having one of these meters where we can see that we're still hitting a good number of our milestones very concisely. And what we're interested now is we start to make other improvements, particularly in the areas of faster, that we don't see that dial slipping into the orange and the red areas. Another interesting measure, we've only got time to look at a couple today, is one of my favourite quality measures, which is escape defects. Earlier we looked at that graph with all the lines on it. I've been interested in measures for many years now, and I've visited a lot of organisations, and then often you'll find that there's some graphs pinned up with these, they look like heart monitors. The arrows or lines are all crossing, they're all running along, and people get one every month from their configuration management department or their test department, and they pin it up on their wall. And I once asked one of the managers who had this pinned up on his wall, I said, that looks very interesting, what do you do with that? He says, well, I get it every month and I pin it up. He made no use of it at all because he couldn't tell whether quality was getting better or worse. If rather than showing lines for priority 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 defects, if we weight them, if we decide that a priority 1 is worth 10 times a 2, which is twice a 3, etc., we can reduce it to a single line. And we can look then at the weight of defects we have in the live environment and the rate of defects. In this case, this is in an outsourcing situation, the number of defects that we've received from our supplier. So you can see from this graph that there's a lot less defects live than in the software that's delivered. It shows some of the value that independent testing can add. But there's still quite a high level of defects. So we need to decide what would be a good target for the organization as a whole. And we can set that target. So here we set it based on a number of 1s and 2s being acceptable. And we said 200 defect points. And as we've focused in on this, you can see the lines are starting to get slightly closer together. But live, we're now hitting that target. And as we go into the future, we continue to reduce the number of defects that we're detecting from the suppliers, reduce the number that's being detected live, so we're not actually just letting those defects through to hit the users. And we can also focus on particular defects easily with dials. So there's usually, it's a good idea to set a tolerance for the number of priority 1 incidents and priority 2 incidents that are allowed. Difficult to see from the weighted graph, but you have put a couple of dials next to the graph and we've got a full picture of the quality levels for the entire organization. This kind of stuff, just looking at all the defects, making sure, telling where they are, making sure they've been charged, and we can get a very good quality measure and demonstrate that we're improving and increasing the overall level of quality of the software that's been released. So those are a couple of measures. They're typically places that we start, predictability and some quality. But we do have lots of other measures that we've available, all with simple, intuitive graphs and obvious trends. The other ones, so we talked a bit about requirements focus and volume achievement, and we looked at the big dashboard. In each case, we look at it from the business perspective and from the IT perspective. So for milestones, did I get it when I was promised it? And from the IT perspective, are we hitting our dates, etc. We have measures in the area faster with faster decision making, faster time to production, timeless of delivery, faster response times. So from a business response, do we get a fast response to our inquiries? From an IT perspective, are our service levels improving? And we can measure against those service levels as well. With cheaper, we can look at things like average project cost, cost per use case point or function point. We can do some interesting things with story points. We can go and find out if the business believes they're getting value for money and whether we're seen as providing value money. Is IT the preferred supplier? And budget achievement is a useful one. Are we coming in under budget? From a business perspective, did it cost what I expected? And with Happier, as I talked about earlier, we've got customer, employee. You can also look at sponsors and user satisfaction, the requirements volatility, and whether we're meeting the business needs. And what this does is provide a great starting point to kickstart your measurement program. Nobody would measure all those things, certainly not at the beginning, but they allow us to have tried and tested, simple, intuitive measures that we can use to address the particular process improvement and performance goals that you have as an organization within a framework that is aspirational, makes it very easy to understand why we're doing this. This year we're going to get better by increasing the percentage of release dates hit from 40% to 80%. Very simple way of phrasing both the goal and identifying the measure. So once we've identified some of these things, how do we set our targets? How do we get going? Now the key thing about the target setting is that if you have intuitive measures with obvious trends, with only 1 or 2 lines to track, it's very easy to set targets. So here we have just sort of a much more typical starter pack, just 8 simple measures. Some are more expensive, like cost per use case point is a more expensive measure to collect than typically an escape defect, many of which you would have information to mine. But we can then set targets. So over 80% of our release dates hit. Decisions made in less than 8 weeks. Time to production less than 12 weeks. One of the biggest agile transformations in the UK was the one at British Telecom. And the key driver there was I've been a little bit more generous here with 12 weeks, gets you more like 120. But we've got, we can measure that and measure that time to production. We could measure it for different sizes of project or size of team. But the target there is to be less than 12 weeks. And with our escape defects, as I saw, we can have a target of less than 200 defect points live. We can do the same with the cost per use case point, with budget achievement. And let's increase our customer satisfaction and our employee satisfaction. So by having the simple measures, we can then start to set targets and express them very, very easily. So, you know, this year we are going to get faster by reducing the decision-making time to less than 8 weeks. We are going to get faster by reducing the time to production, the release cycle, to less than 12 weeks. Very easy for people to understand. The graphs and the meters make it very easy to view the progress. So for those of you with a measurement background, what we've really done is we've taken the goal, question, metric idea and build a framework around it. So what are our goals? The goals are to get better by, and then we have the questions to support that and the measurements. We can use the framework to understand our goals. What's most important? Is it to get better? Is it to get faster? Is it to get cheaper? Is it have we got problems with employee satisfaction? So what problems, what goals have we got? Which are the questions, the kind of questions people want answering, and then what measures and metrics do we have? Another thing you need to do is establish baselines and costs. And a lot of these things you can do work to establish baseline previous performance. It may be a bit subjective, but as you go on, rolling forward, you can capture year to date, and you can set your targets with a lot of these measures like customer satisfaction at a certain level. Other ones you may set as a percentage increase or decrease in that particular area. In the next webinar we're going to do, we're actually going to look at a case study where this has proved to be incredibly popular. One of the things that's talked about by the business, by all levels of management, is better, faster, cheaper, happier. There was a poster campaign showing how to become world-class, what was going to happen this year in those things. And the targets, once you've collected the information, you can start to slice and dice it. We were looking at the organization as a whole, but you could also look at it by department or by program. So we can, what happened to this organization is the targets actually have ended up written into the personal objectives of the program managers, the project managers, and all the people involved in the organization. So we can set targets, publish the dashboard, and tune it as targets are met and the goals change. Once we stop looking at trends, we can make sure we've got the right meters in place to monitor and make sure we're not degrading performance. And what it ends up with is this very simple way of saying, you know, this year or this 6 months or this quarter, we are going to become better by, and then we can plug in some of the questions on the measure and get very simple aspirational statements that give the goals and targets for people, but also provide the motivation and get people interested in those measures. So, as I mentioned, if you'd like to join us next time to see how this all fits together and has changed the focus of an entire organization, hopefully there's enough interest that it'd be worth seeing the case study and understanding how this works in practice. So we're just going to wrap up with a few questions and things. Here's a final slide just to reiterate. We're not just doing the measures, we're setting the targets. We have the very intuitive aspirational framework to do it. Make sure we're balancing those forces and achieving the goals of the organization as a whole in a way that communicates with everyone involved, from the most business-like business person to the most technical person. Okay, so it should be time for some questions. So back to Leanne.
Thank you very much, Ian. And before we take questions, I just wanted to mention to everybody the next webcast that Ian has been talking about is set for May 27th. So everyone on this webcast today will receive the invite for that, so you can register if you're interested in learning the case study example of succeeding with measurement. And also I wanted to point out to everyone on the call, take this opportunity, IJI released SWORK 3.0 last week. For those not familiar with SWORK, it's a framework for creating, sharing, and viewing best essential practices in your organization. There is a 90-day trial version available off of the IJI website, so feel free to go and check that out. And I'm just checking the questions. I do know that we do have some questions, Ian. So my first question is actually for me. So the presentation will be available tomorrow. The recording of it will go out tomorrow to all attendees, and non-attendees actually can access the recording of this webcast. So the first question for you, Ian, is do you have a definition of what it means in terms of your measures to be more agile?
Well, to be completely honest, I don't care how agile people are. I want to be able to look and see who's doing better, who's getting faster, who's getting cheaper, who's getting happier. Agility is a very secondary measure, and I'm not sure how you would measure agility as Agile's becoming more and more a synonym for everything that's good. I think it's very important we focus on the primary measures. Where I've seen measurement data for large projects, there's evidence to show that waterfall may be better for bigger projects. Don't think this is true, but because people aren't measuring the effects of what they're doing, everything becomes very much a matter of passion, religion, and fundamentalism. What we can do with this kind of measurement program is measure the effectiveness of the projects at different levels of agility, and then be able to find out what the right practices and the right way of working is for your organization. People have different attitudes to quality, different attitudes to governance. If you're building safety critical, life-threatening type systems, you're going to have very different quality targets and much more independent testing than if you're just building little web applications or trader floor type applications for a single trader. But they can all be measured within the framework. So I hope that answers your question. I like to measure the results of the agility rather than how agile people are. Okay.
Another question, actually, and it's a similar question to the earlier broadcast that we had today. Why better, faster, cheaper, happier? Why use that quadrant versus another type of measurement?
There are lots of measurement frameworks out there, but most of them fall into the trap of putting the means before the ends. Something I'm actually quite a big fan of is Balanced Scorecard, with its financial, customer, learning and growth, process quarters. And I've done measurements in those areas. But the problem is that it doesn't inspire people. It doesn't act as an aspirational framework. This year we are going to do something in the learning and growth quadrant. Well, why? What are you doing? What are you going to do in there? Do you really need, how balanced does it need to be? What we found is that better, faster, cheaper, happier spreads like a meme through organizations. It becomes something everyone can relate to, everyone can talk about, everyone can sign up for. With a lot of the more technical frameworks, they put up a barrier to the measures. They make them sound self-important. They make them sound only for people with a degree in IT measurement. I get very concerned with a lot of the stuff I see about measurement in IT. It may sound a bit arrogant, but often I see measures and I don't understand them. And I tend to think then, if I can't understand it, how are business people going to understand that? I've been in the industry 20 years and I don't understand some of the these measures that people promote, or what the point of many of them are. By keeping a very simple, intuitive framework, we can keep that focus on business goals, on business results. And I say, it does act like a meme. It's something it's aspirations, something everyone can sign up to. So that's why I would say this is the best way to go. It fits with the goals of agility. And when we're working in one customer, had a long conversation about this with our champion in the account. And someone said, well, better, faster, cheaper, happier. That all sounds a little sort of flippant, and we need something more self-important. We need to have quality and financial and stuff like that. And the guy said, well, if I was presenting an academic paper to IEEE, I'd probably agree with you. He said, if I want our business to sign up for this, if I want to get them on board, better, faster, cheaper, happier is the way to go. And it really does work with people. So that would be the argument. There are other good frameworks out there, but they tend to have a slight mismatch with the goals of the organization and alienate a lot of the important stakeholders by presenting things with the technobabble and this sort of front of importance that's not really necessary. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And then one more question, and if this appears to be my last question, so if you do have a question, please submit it while Ian is answering this one. If you're starting out putting a measurement program in place, is there, it seems this is starting, the question is there a certain number of measurements you should start with?
You don't want to have too many when you're starting. You want to have some clear, measurable improvement goals. And, we've got the sort of 7 plus or minus 2 kind of comprehension. So typically we would start with sort of 6 to 8, maybe 4 key measures, and some that we're putting in place because we know what the next round of improvements would be. A lot depends on what information is available, what problems people have. But I would certainly only start with sort of about half a dozen to get going. Get those trends up to speed and then look at the next set of problems and bring in some more measures. We would start to put in mechanisms to collect information, and that's one of the key roles that software development and application lifecycle management tools is collecting the data. But we need to make sure that any measurement we do is cost effective and that people aren't spending all their time filling in surveys, questionnaires and spreadsheets, just so that we can draw a line that doesn't change. So keep it simple, keep it to typically about half a dozen to get started. And often some of the initial ones will be very much surveyed. We can do an awful lot with just some surveys to get started. Get the qualitative stuff, find out if people think you're getting cheaper, and then replace that with actual more concrete measures as you go forward. Is that okay?
Good, thank you. And I did get a couple more questions actually. What is the difference between team velocity and the term volume that was mentioned in this webcast? And should we count the production release at the end of each iteration as a project release for measurement purposes?
Compound questions.
Yeah.
Velocity is a very useful measure for projects to see how fast they're doing against the story points. This is something you'll measure every 2 to 4 weeks, and it's very much a personal measure within the project. One project could have a velocity of 80 story points and be going slower than another project with a velocity of 40 story points, because there is no definitive unit of story points. When I was talking about the volume achievement, and it could possibly do with a better name, at the beginning of each of those projects, they will have said, we think we're going to be able to deliver you X story points. When they get to, the major release from the release plan, that release will contain a number of story points, estimated by themselves in the same way. So we can turn that into a percentage, and then those percentages can be rolled up and compared across all the projects. So we don't know what velocity they went at, we just know that they met their commitments and delivered the number of story points they said, or they were over or they were under. But because there is no unit, story points are not a mathematically defined unit, relative estimating, the use of planning poker cards. Some projects stories will just inherently be bigger than others, but they'll give them the same relative estimate using planning poker cards and things like that. So that's the difference between the volume achievement and the velocity. Velocity is one of those measures that sadly doesn't roll up. If you were to try and institutionalize an organization's velocity, then everyone's story points would have to be even, and you'd lose a lot of the benefits of agile estimating and all those good things. In terms of the more frequent release cycles and things like that, for projects that are starting out, you typically focus measuring on the major releases. The little ones, the production releases every iteration, they're too fragile. Some of them will have a lot more in than others. You have a couple of weeks holiday during a sprint and not much will get done. So we tend to look at those things. But where we do have those fast release cycles, things are going live, we can, again, because we use a lot of percentage measures and we're looking at when defects are released, we can apply a lot of those measures. But we do have to be careful about when we do the measurements. So typically, when we do the release planning, that will include the measurement planning for that project. And generally, we focus on the major release, the product of a number of sprints or iterations. So I hope that answers that question.
Good, thank you. And last question before we wrap up. What about measuring rate of benefits delivery?
There are lots of interesting measures you can do around value and benefit, but those are really things that the business needs to measure, not the IT department. If you get people to assign value to stories, then you've got no proof that that value ever actually was accrued. So alongside this is what we looked at, was very much the measurements for an IT organization, an IT department. You would want to measure the business benefit, the benefit of IT. There's lots of other measures that we didn't get to talk about, particularly interesting cost of ownership. We could have the best agile project in the world, delivering loads of software very quickly, and the cost of ownership could go through the roof. There's some evidence of that even from the original XP project, the old Chrysler one. So those are all important things. It's all about that goal question metric. Actual benefits and value are, for most organizations, a very difficult thing to do, and those are really in the hands of the product owner and the business. The IT, what we're measuring really here is IT's ability to deliver against the direction and objectives that are agreed in conjunction with their customers. But somewhere you should be measuring things like the profit you're making and all that good stuff as well. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ian. And just before we wrap up, Ian has offered his email address, so if you have questions on the content of this presentation, feel free to email him directly. And also to note that webcast recordings, white papers, and quite a load of other resources are available on the Ivar Jacobson site. And if you have questions regarding any of IJI services, whether that's training, mentoring, consulting in your region, you can send me an email and I will put you forward to the correct person in your region. So that's the end of our webcast. Thank you very much, Ian, and we hope that you'll all join us on May 27th. Thank you.